Welcome back to Keeping It Real. The people have spoken and they said no more Jim Vejvoda ever again, only Ahmad and Terri, and here we are. Just kidding. Jim is back from his Grand Italian vacation, but sick from his Grand Italian vacation. So once again, you guys are stuck with us, the B team for the best team on Keeping It Real. Tiny little movie trailer came out this morning. I feel like
fantasy?
A couple people have talked about it. If you haven't seen it, there is a second full theatrical trailer for Rogue One that came out. Ahmad, we've had this conversation before, and we know Jim's answer, so we will share Jim's answer here. But are you excited for Rogue One now?
I've stated that I'm already in line. How about you? What did you think this time around?
I feel like this is the best trailer, and a lot of not in the world, but for this movie. And I do think that for all that I typically don't want a movie trailer to give too much away, I think this trailer was right to give more away. We found out about why Jyn Erso is doing what she's doing, about her father, Mads Mikkelsen's character, Galen Erso, who we didn't know. We speculated, and we were right in our speculation that he's basically the Oppenheimer of the Death Star, and we learn more about him. There's just more amazing cinematography. There's this one shot in particular that we'll get into in a little bit, but I feel like this was the right amount of story. And if you watch this trailer and you still don't get where Rogue One takes place in the Star Wars chronology, that's probably more on you now.
Yeah, I think the other ones were framed it in a way where you definitely, I thought the other ones, the previous trailers, framed it so you definitely knew where it was. This one was very story heavy, and we got probably our first Star Wars flashback ever. So I think this gives you the characters, it gives you the emotional depth that people were probably like, you and Jim were kind of looking for as well.
And Jim was sort of our Star Wars Grinch on this, our Rogue One Grinch. He did say on Twitter this morning when we had a chance to talk to him, he's sold finally. He wasn't really feeling Rogue One, but he said this trailer gave him the feels, if you will, made him feel something, gave him some chills. So I'm glad that he's on board because it's fun to be excited for Star Wars.
It's a good thing.
So there's this one shot in particular in the trailer, and I wrote a very excited piece. I basically took all my excitement and packed it into some words that I think formulate coherent sentences about this one shot of a fallen Jedi statue. That it's sort of a blink and you miss it moment. It's less than 3 seconds, I know, because I made a GIF out of it. And if you were like watching the trailer on your phone this morning, because it dropped on Good Morning America, which is fairly early East and West Coast time, you could miss it the first time.
Easily. I missed it the first time. But basically, it's a large statue that looks like a Jedi, looks very much like a Jedi we know that's kind of scruffy and lives on Tatooine for a lot of years.
Yeah, I think people are thinking that it could be Obi-Wan Kenobi, which, I don't know if it is going to be Obi-Wan just because, first of all, Obi-Wan's still alive when this has happened because this is before A New Hope. But also, it is such a massive statue that it seems to me maybe like a guardian of this planet. It's rumored this is basically the holy site of the Jedi that I'm currently blanking on the name of the planet.
The planet?
Yes.
Jeddah.
Yeah, so I feel like it is something that is welcoming people to this planet, really honoring the legacy of the Jedi, and maybe Obi-Wan at the point that this movie is taking place has not earned the right to that.
Well, if you think about it, his role in the Clone Wars and his connection to Anakin during the Clone Wars, Anakin is revered as one of the great heroes of the Clone Wars. And when we first meet Princess Leia, she mentions General Kenobi, you served my father in the Clone Wars. So you get the impression that at least in the recent history, not maybe as far as New Hope, but in the recent, just after Revenge of the Sith, that Obi-Wan is still widely well regarded and seen as kind of somebody who is a large figure in the Clone Wars.
Well, that is an interesting segue. That's my use of segue for this podcast.
Just one,
because I think the big question Rogue One can answer, has the potential to answer, is basically what happened between the events of Revenge of the Sith, when Order 66 was executed and all the Jedis were killed, to the events of A New Hope when we meet Han Solo. He thinks that the Jedi are fairy tale. Like, that's really maybe 20 to 30 years top. Like, not even. It's like probably closer to 18 years, because that's when how old Luke is supposed to be. So that's not a lot of time for the Empire to essentially wipe out a millennia old organization and knowledge of them.
Well, what we find out, and if you're reading any of the Star Wars books, the new ones that are canon, in Lost Stars, the book is about 2 Imperial recruits, and there are scenes of them. There are a couple sections of the book where they're studying for exams, and in the exams, you get the impression that the Empire has already started rewriting history through their Imperial history classes, and you're like, oh, Mace Windu had a criminal gang, and he stopped a lawful execution. Yeah, that's the correct answer, and you find out that at least from Palpatine down, they're wiping out any historical information, and they're kind of retelling it to suit their needs, which is kind of generally how history works.
But that to me is so fascinating, and something that, again, this movie has the opportunity to dig into a little bit for us to get a sense of that on the eve of what we know is when a Jedi will come back in the form of Luke Skywalker, and we'll start to go on that journey again. And I also do think the promise of this idea of like a holy site for Jedi, and again, this ties back to that shot of the destroyed massive statue. You can see the scale because there's this little ship you can see with a shadow over it, and this statue looks like it could be a mountain. But the promise of learning more about how the Force as a religion and as and the Jedi mythology fits into this world, which is something that, for all that the movies have been about Jedi, it's been much more in the books, in the comics, and the expanded universe, and the video games that have explored that, and the movies themselves haven't. Is that something that you hope for all that we know, Jedi are not a big part of Rogue One? Do you hope that they explore that?
It's nice. It's nice that while they're not a part of the story, they're related to the story, and they're at this kind of area for them. I think the films haven't explored the relationship with the Force on non-Jedi. People, we've seen in Star Wars in A New Hope, we see people, that ancient religion, or Han Solo kind of refers to it as kind of hocus pocusy type stuff. We don't really see what day-to-day people who maybe don't live in the core worlds, like Coruscant and those areas, or in the Outer Rim, of what they feel about that. You see that a little more in the books, and people do practice kind of the Force as part of their religious kind of instructional, like, oh yes, there's this and this and the Force, and then they have their own kind of culture around it. But it's interesting to see them kind of tie it in, and I think that you'll get a bigger. This will probably be the biggest world building they've done in a Star Wars movie outside of the core characters in probably a long time.
And I think I could be projecting because I got very excited about about this shot in particular. That was the one I kept going back to and looking at. But we know that that Episode 8, in The Force Awakens, we left Luke basically at the first Jedi temple, and so for this film to start to explore that stuff it makes sense to me how that would then set up directly in a rather indirect way some of what we're learning about I'm assuming we're learning about in Episode 8.
We're in a period, especially where A New Hope starts, where there are no Jedi. As far as anybody knows, there are no Jedi. It's not something people probably even discuss a whole lot more. And this will be kind of a indirect connector to the return of more Jedi.
Yes,
hopefully.
Yes, far down the road. Now, I do also want to talk about the confirmation of what, again, we'd already speculated about Galen Erso, Mads Mikkelsen's character, which to me, it's very funny that this is coming out not that long before Doctor Strange, which also stars Mads Mikkelsen as the villain. And also we're going to be getting Forrest Whitaker in Black Panther, and he is in Rogue One as well. So lots of sharing of talent in the Disney talent pool. Yeah. I found these scenes to be very affecting. You're right, it is sort of the first flashback we've ever seen in a Star Wars movie, and that's, I think, is the understanding of how he'll sort of fit into the story. But what did you think about that confirmed element of the story? What do you think that adds to Rogue One?
Well, it's nice to see kind of, the last, it also connects it to Revenge of the Sith and Attack of the Clones, where you kind of see there's this tiny little subplot of the first time we see the Death Star plan, or the model, and then in Revenge of the Sith, they're building the Death Star. So this gives us some kind of, this seems to be less about him building or being a part of the building of the Death Star as him being the Force beyond the creation of the laser. And the laser is the only part that we see that happens in a construction scene in the shot where they're lowering the laser back into it. So this seems more of a race to make sure that laser does not become operational and the station by example. And and kind of how the Empire kind of found the right person for the job to get this done, whether they wanted to be involved with it or not.
And is the
their coercion of people to work for them.
Is the implication too that because we know that the core elements you need to make a lightsaber are on this particular planet, tying it back to the holy planet where
probably kyber crystals, which they used to make lightsabers.
Yeah, that to me is sort of the implication that maybe that's what they need, these same crystals that will create the laser for the Death Star that destroys planets, which, not something I ever connected before, but certainly makes sense, even given the technology of the time, having them look very similar in the movie.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what the Empire does. They go to different planets, they loot the planet, they put people into slavery, they have a mine, they get whatever raw materials they need, and they use it on their projects. So that's probably what's going on, and why they're on the planet Jedha. Either there's kyber crystals there, or there's something they need to finish the Death Star. So it'll kind of be interesting.
And before we move on from Rogue One, I do want to say, after seeing this, we're never, this entire podcast is keeping it rogue. But I do think that, granted, we've only seen trailers, they could be highlighting the most cinematographic, what am I trying to say? The most beautiful shots in this movie. But I do think that this is probably going to be the most stunning Star Wars movie we've seen yet, just based on these trailers alone. They're beautiful.
Yeah, it's a lot of wide vistas and wide shots and day and night, and not a whole lot of, I mean, honestly, aside from, the starships, you don't see a lot of CG in this. The tank looks practical, even the crashed X-Wing is practical. The sets everything looks real, which is something we got more of in The Force Awakens, and it's nice to see even more of it now.
And I think something that's fun about Star Wars, and I've said this before, but the thing that I enjoyed most about the prequels is exploring new worlds and new planets we haven't seen before. To me, a lot of the original trilogy we had some planets, but you get like 2, maybe 3 a movie.
Maybe.
It was very focused on the space travel. We spent a lot of time in the Millennium Falcon and whatnot, whereas the prequels had these very elaborate worlds. We've talked before in relation to The Force Awakens how a lot of those planets were very evocative of planets from A New Hope. Yeah. So to see some very different, interesting looking planets in Rogue One is really exciting to me. I hope there is some diversity of locations. And again, the imagery we've seen is just stunning so far.
It's shaping up to be a very good-looking film, which is awesome.
Which I'm happy with. So we're clearly very excited about Rogue One from this trailer. We want to know your thoughts. What were the shots that really stood out to you? What are you most excited about? What are you most intrigued about Mads Mikkelsen's character? Let us know. Now, we would transition here to the next biggest talking point of the week in movies, which is Fantastic Beasts. There's a lot of crazy stuff, but you're going to have to wait until later in the podcast for Joshua to magically appear and talk a little bit. He's seen 10 minutes of footage from Fantastic Beasts and has some details on J.K. Rowling's announcement. But again, you will have to stay tuned. So just consider this our bookmark that we'll return to later in the podcast. So I want to move on to a really, really cool thing that we got to debut this week from Justice League. Now, we've seen a lot of characters from Justice League, but someone we haven't seen is Mera, Aquaman's life partner. We couldn't call her wife, which makes me think either they're living in sin or maybe they're on the eve of getting together when Justice League is happening.
Aquaman's going to take his time. He's figuring it out.
There are plenty of fish in the sea, but she's the only one for him. Heyo. But so we debuted sort of the first look, and I'm curious, what did you think of this look at Amber Heard's character in Justice League?
It looked good. It was funny to see that people resaturated the picture after we posted on the site, because when you see it resaturated, it's very vibrant green, and it's a nice looking suit. But she looks good in the suit. It's a nice costume. It's kind of what you would picture in your head, like, I wonder what they would look like in Atlantis. Oh yeah, big green kind of underwatery suit. Yeah, that makes sense.
I really did like the desaturated shot that was a very Zack Snyder shot that we were given.
Which he took.
Yeah, which he took of Amber Heard, sort of just in costume, standing probably on set. That to me looked like it fit very much with the aesthetic of this movie. I wasn't as sold on the character poster. I don't know, the way that her face looked a little strange. It was basically her underwater, but
it was a model. You could tell that they probably built the design of the costume before the casting. There was probably pre-production, and then probably after casting they put it in because the face doesn't quite sit right in the right direction, and I think they put the face too small for the hair.
The trailer that we've seen of Justice League certainly seems like they're playing up the fun of bringing this group of heroes together who might not get along. And I think that Aquaman is one character who we saw butt heads with Batman. I am very curious how they're going to make these different characters' worlds blend together. And Atlantis, to me, seems like the biggest jump from the practical world we've seen so far. So I think that the look of Mera definitely sits right with me. And I'm intrigued to see how they do bring those Atlantean elements in, if they do really get into them here.
I don't think it's something that we've ever really seen on film.
Yeah.
In any superhero film, but I can't think of too many movies where they have an underwater world outside of that character from that Star Wars movie that I'm not going to mention by name. But I mean, those were in bubbles and they were kind of in structures. So it'd be interesting to see if they speak in water. Are there vacuum? I'm super curious.
Is it terrible that I have sort of been picturing that unnamed Star Wars character's world when thinking of Atlantis? Because I think you're right. That is sort of the only other one.
That's the only, ever. So
that or Atlantis, the Lost Empire, neither of which are the right Atlantis. So I'm really excited to see what they put together for this. And I have a feeling that Justice League news is going to be start coming pretty fast and heavy. As we get towards the end of the year. Obviously, a lot of big movies coming out, most of which we're going to be talking about in this podcast. So lots of different releases they can attach that trailer to.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. Moving on, so speaking of other big movies, Doctor Strange is coming out fairly soon, beginning of November.
Tapeception.
Yes. Jim and I already had a chance to talk about this early 15-minute sneak peek footage that I had a chance to watch early. I just talked myself in circles for a second.
And was that on IMAX?
It was IMAX 3D, and man, it's bananas trippy nonsense astral plane. It looks awesome, but I'm very curious to see how the broad audience will respond to it, how your aunts and your grandmas and your little nephews are going to respond to this sort of footage. But something else, we did get a chance to talk to both Kevin Feige and Scott Derrickson, the director, after, and I'm really intrigued about how this movie is going to fit into the larger whole. One thing that speaking of Mads Mikkelsen from Rogue one thing I talked to Scott Derrickson about is sort of Marvel's villain problem, which I think even the biggest supporters of Marvel can admit a lot of their villains are throwaway in the standalone movies.
The heroes always outshine the villains, which is fine because there have been a lot of other films where the villain, like the Jim Carrey and outshining kind of Batman in all of his scenes because he's so over the top as the Riddler, or Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight, kind of being the focal point of the film. Marvel's got the opposite problem. Especially to me, I really love Civil War, but I thought that for Baron Zemo, who's such a big part of the Captain America lore, to be basically a lone guy on a revenge mission with almost seemingly unlimited resources, he felt like a plot device. He didn't feel like a villain.
And to me,
he was there to get people into places.
Right, and that to me is the innate flaw of these Marvel villain of the movie. It could be basically a villain of a week in a serialized superhero TV show because they are basically there to service pushing this hero towards either becoming an Avenger or, fighting the next big fight. And with these origin movies, like Doctor Strange is very much an origin movie, you're gonna have that. This is just a stepping stone for Doctor Strange to team up with the Avengers and to fight Thanos. To me, the most compelling villains that we've seen so far, or at least most interesting, are Loki, who stretched across multiple movies, and Thanos, who they've been building up to across multiple movies. So I talked about this with Scott Derrickson, and he said, it is, he can see where that complaint comes from. Yeah. And for him, as I noted, Mads Mikkelsen is the man who made us love Hannibal, so he's certainly great at making you care about a villain if he needs to. What Scott Derrickson said was that what was most important to him was conveying Caecilius's ideology, and he cited John Doe in Seven and the Joker in The Dark Knight as being two examples of his favorite villain scenes where he thought that seeing the world through their eyes made complete sense, which was very important to capture that. And when you see it through their eyes, you're like, that is terrifying. Yeah. Does that sell you any on Caecilius? Like, or do you still think we'll fall into maybe the same issue as before?
I mean, the villain has to have. It doesn't have to have a personal connection to the hero, because I think that's always overdone. Although it worked in the first Iron Man, where you had Stain, and Stain turned out to be actually a very strong villain for that film. Not so much with Whiplash and Iron Man 2. But I think if there's some kind of connection that's bigger than the movie, or why this person is important as either an ongoing threat or a threat to Doctor Strange personally or something like that, then maybe you'll be a little more invested. So.
What was also interesting is during this Q&A, Feige confirmed that Captain Marvel will be an origin movie. I think something that people...
I don't mind.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. She has a very distinct origin movie, though the rumor was that they had to go back and retool it because they were concerned it was too close to Green Lantern's origin. But what he told us was that they did find a very interesting, something he was excited about way to bring Captain Marvel to life. But there was some questioning whether she was going to come fully formed as a superhero to the Avengers world, or whether we would find out how she became Captain Marvel. It sounds like we are going to find out how she became Captain Marvel.
I feel like that's a character that you can definitely launch in another movie, especially because of the
Which
way
they are
they've
in the
reframed
2019.
her. Yeah, they've reframed her, Carol Danvers as part of the military, and you can kind of introduce her backdoor there, and then before leading into her kind of, oh, this is this character we met. Something different is happening to him. It's funny that they would mention Green Lantern because Marvel...
they didn't mention it.
Well, okay.
That was the rumor on the street.
Well, I mean, the Marvel's character that's closest to Green Lantern is Nova, and we've seen the Nova Corps, and you can put in a Richard Rider movie. It's fine. You can do that. We'll watch it.
I mean,
it's cool.
We're getting to the point that not every character needs to be launched on Earth. We're, especially after Thor Ragnarok, which will be out in space. We have the Guardians out there. You could introduce Captain Marvel there and have her intersect with other characters before coming to Earth, which I think is a big question that is still unanswered as to whether they'll start her in space or start her here.
I've been saying Phase 4 should be in space. I think to deter against any type of superhero fatigue, you've kind of got to reset the playing field, and doing kind of a batch of sci-fi superhero movies would be a good way to protect against people going, I don't like superhero movies.
Well, it's funny because I even apologized to Feige because, again, like, we've been talking about Doctor Strange and bugging him about Doctor Strange for years, and now Doctor Strange is about to come out, and I'm like, so Captain Marvel, so Infinity War. But even he was looking ahead, and he said, people are already bugging him about his next 5-year plan, and he's like, let's just finish the last one. But something he was just bursting with excitement about is the idea that Captain Marvel is the most powerful superhero they will be introducing. Within the realm of the MCU, she is going to be the most powerful person. Now, the challenge there is how do you balance that with the other Avengers, which we've talked about in terms of Civil War, feeling like you can feasibly have Hawkeye go up against Spider-Man. But I'm really excited about that. Tipping the balances with Captain Marvel.
And I think the challenge there is making sure that there's a threat big enough.
Thanos.
Well, I mean, for a standalone.
That's true.
It depends where they base the character. If they keep her in space, or if they have her come to Earth, or she deals with some Kree stuff, who knows? And maybe she can run into Ronan.
My feeling is that the biggest issue the MCU is going to have the closer they get to Infinity War is having it feel like any of these other movies matter, are more than just set up for the big face-off, which Civil War to me is the last one that they had a very established, this is why it matters, the Avengers are fighting. But even when it
Still felt like it was totally an Avengers movie.
Totally, but even when it ends, everyone is going to have to come back together to fight Thanos. And now how do you continue to keep the stakes high for anything but really Thor, Ragnarok, and Guardians 2, in my mind, because they're elsewhere? How do you
Well,
keep
that's
the
what you
stakes
do.
high?
You do what they're doing with Doctor Strange, where this is not directly connected. It's kind of it's probably the closest since Ant-Man that they got to a standalone movie, where it's just like, this is a thing that's happening over in this pocket, and this person is going to deal with this one threat. What they're going to do probably with Guardians, where they'll, maybe not directly tie it in. They can put them in a different pocket of space. I think they'll just have to make all of these next films that happened before that very standalone, is very single story. Thor will take place probably in a different. I'm sure that movie will bring Thor closer back to Infinity War, but we'll see.
But even with, Black Panther, who already has connections to the Avengers, Ant-Man and the Wasp, who obviously have connection. I feel like that is going to be a hurdle to overcome. And at this point, I'm sure that the top people at Marvel have heard complaints about the villains, about the seeming lack of stakes. No one really dies. I'm curious if we see any changes or if it's more of the same, which certainly is crowd pleasing enough as it is. Moving on, New York Comic Con was last weekend. Neither of us were there, but we were here, but we got to watch a lot of the great trailers that came out of it. Now, there were some things we didn't get a chance to watch, including some footage from War of the Planet of the Apes, which Scott Kalora, our beloved Scott Kalora, wrote up a great piece. So you can read.
It.
Yes, he enjoyed it a lot, so you can read his insight. Also, not technically movies, but Eric Goldman got to see some of the first footage from Iron Fist. Also wrote impressions on the site. We can talk about what we've seen, which is probably the biggest thing, the Power Rangers trailer.
Which I think if anybody was concerned about the level of quality and care that the studio was going to take with this particular film, I don't think they're that worried anymore.
I've seen a split response. I've seen people say, okay, yeah, maybe I was on the fence and I'm interested now. And I've seen some people say, why are they just angsty Breakfast Club kids? So where do you fall on that spectrum?
The way you sell a movie is, you can't sell it to one audience. This was the introduction trailer. So before they go into full off Zords and Power Coins and full Power Rangers, you have to get an audience that maybe wasn't going to see this movie interested in these characters. Like, oh, there's a story of teenagers. I relate to that. And hey, there are these different people. They set up very distinct character types. They're character types we've seen a million times.
You're right.
But they're very distinct character types, and they're showing you that they're going to be in a situation that is going to take them somewhere else. And the trailer pretty much takes you through how we meet these characters and how these characters kind of come to be connected to each other. It's not like they're a group of friends that were like in a clubhouse together already, and they get them up to the point where they get involved with the Power Ranger-y, spacey stuff. And then from there they can go with, hey, next trailer is going to be this, and more focused on the elements that the mainstream Power Rangers audience are used to.
See, I was very much on the fence with Power Rangers. In fact, not very interested because for all that I consumed like Sailor Moon and Pokemon and a lot of other nerdy things that were of an age with Power Rangers, I just never got into Power Rangers. And from afar, if you aren't a super fan, I'm like, it looks a little cheesy. I'm not completely sold on this. So I was on the fence. I saw this. I was like, you know what? Yeah, like this does grab me more than anything I've seen before. This makes me more interested. And I can see how people who loved X, Y, and Z about the original Power Rangers might see this as a different twist. But I do think it's the smartest first trailer they could have put out. It felt very Transformers 1 to me in a good way, in the sense that you get invested with the human story and then you're brought in and you can buy the other elements because you care enough about these people.
Yeah, as opposed to throwing everything out there at the beginning and people either having the love it or hate it reaction. They're like, let's get people intrigued, let's get people curious, and then we can kind of give them more information as they go along. And I'm on the same page as you. I didn't grow up watching Power Rangers, are a little younger for me. I'm an Ultraman person, so I didn't have any kind of built-in nostalgia, but I thought that it looked like, if you like the old Power Rangers show where there was spandex and there was foam costumes and smoke bombs and explosions and stuff like that, you're about to go get the big budget, high special effects, production value version of that, which If you like it, this might make you very happy.
We aren't trying to sell you on it. We're just saying that we are more sold on it now.
Yeah,
than we
it's
were
definitely
before.
it's a real thing that that's what they're doing with it.
Right.
So.
The other two trailers that that made a bit of a splash: the new Underworld trailer for Underworld Blood Wars, which,
If they
I
keep
sorta
making
like
them,
it.
if
I
they
sorta
keep
dig
making
it.
them, people will keep going.
I loved the first Underworld movie. I really liked it. I did not care for any of the ones that came after, especially the most recent one. But it seems like maybe they're trying to go back to basics a little bit. Also I love Tobias Menzies from Game of Thrones and Outlander. He's the villain in this one. I'm like, yeah, I'll watch Tobias and whatever.
Well, it sounds
he's in.
like if they make one, Terry will go.
Yeah, they'll get at least one. They'll get a $15 box office take. Because I'll just
This
see
is
it
your
once.
audience.
Or maybe not, because I'll just go to a screening.
Yeah, you will.
Yeah. The other movie was Resident Evil, the final chapter. This is not the final chapter of Underworld. It is the final chapter,
Resident Evil.
unless it makes $1 billion for Resident Evil, and I'm sure it'll be Resident Evil: The Epilogue. Resident Evil: The Epilogue Part 2.
This could happen. Now that's one where not being not playing that game and not being because they kind of played it more as a horror
Right.
film, and it's actually way more sci-fi. I actually really liked that first movie. I thought it was fun. It wasn't over the top. It was very low key, and Mila and Michelle running around and zombies and underground and
Did
lots
this
of elevators.
trailer do anything for you?
It reminded me of the last two. They're kind of still in the same zip code. I don't know. When they're on, I watch them.
It's interesting because I feel like as the Resident Evil movies are winding to a close, and we know we also have Assassin's Creed coming, which we've talked plenty about how that could mark a new era of video game movies. It does feel like they're sort of happening at the right time. Resident Evil was a very different type of video game movie. It was not a direct adaptation. It was trying to take the core of the franchise, and I'm sure purists were very upset with the interpretation, but it worked for a broad audience in a way that really none since Resident Evil and the first Tomb Raider really did. So it's an end of an era. It's the final chapter.
Can't wait for that Tomb Raider movie.
Yeah, I'm excited about that as well. All right, now is our transition time.
Magic.
Is this thing on? So we're going to transition over to our Fantastic Beasts conversation with Joshua, and to get rid of this guy over here, why don't we just do a little Lumos. Holy crap, this thing actually worked. Hi, Joshua.
Hey.
It was magic. It was magic. You're here. You have a wand, too.
I do. I just went to the the Fantastic Beasts fan event they had here in LA. It was actually streamed all over the world, and they showed fans all this new footage. And they also had the actors there, which was awesome.
Which, from what we heard, maybe Harry Potter wasn't just a slip of the tongue, but there are actually some real connections to the Harry Potter movies as we know them. Tell us.
Very
tell us
excited.
About these.
This is Newt Scamander's wand, by the way.
You are Newt Scamander. You apparated here.
Yes. So what was really awesome about the footage is that the movie starts like 10 minutes, first 10 minutes of the footage, right? It starts and it shows Grindelwald's I guess it was his fortress, then it became his prison later, but I guess at this point in the timeline, it's his fortress.
And we'll just pause there. Grindelwald, if you don't remember, we will learn about him throughout the Harry Potter books and movies, but really in the Deathly Hallows, where he was Dumbledore's close friend as a child turned enemy, and a lot of their history is explored. So very important character to sort of the mythology of Harry Potter.
He was sort of the precursor to Voldemort.
He was
the
like
big guy,
wizard.
like threatening Muggles and sort of taking over the magical world before Voldemort. Then Dumbledore beat him.
And
Dumbledore, it's like Dumbledore's gay lover.
Yeah,
We
it's
should
super
mention that.
sexy. It's super sexy.
Yeah.
But I
So-
guess at this time, Grindelwald would probably be coming down from the height of his villainy.
No,
Or
this
at
is
his
rising.
height. This is
to
rising.
the height
okay.
of his villainy. He's
Okay.
at his fortress, right? And there's 5 wizards sort of like slowly creeping up to his fortress with like their wands lit. Then this one giant wave of magic just annihilates them and kills them all. And then it cuts back and you see Grindelwald from behind, sort of like the blonde hair. I thought he was a ginger, but I guess he's blonde. And then that sort of like sets the tone for the movie. And then it goes off on this real sort of like newspaper headlines of saying like Grindelwald strikes again and like Grindelwald rising in power and then it kind of then transitions from over there in the UK to America to New York City and talking about how like there's a ban on magical creatures and like there's unrest with no mages and stuff, and then we see Newt. Then a few more things happen, but I just want to stop right there, roll that back, and talk about like, wow, I could not believe they started the movie on something like that.
So is that actually the opening of the movie?
Yes, that's the first 10 minutes of the movie.
Do you think that, because the Grindelwald revelation is like a really big deal and the most firm connection that we have between the Fantastic Beasts movies to the Harry Potter films, do you think that that's just like set dressing? Do you think that's just sort of explaining the state of the wizarding world when we jump over to America? Or do you think Grindelwald could be like the main villain for these movies? How many movies we'll get to in a minute. But do you think that he maybe is like the main threat and we're building up to that?
I definitely think so.
Okay.
I feel, we know this just isn't one movie. And so there's going to be more story to tell. And I feel like he might be like the Emperor. Like right now in the first movie, I didn't get the sense that we're going to see him sort of like in the flesh, but I did get the sense that we might have him lurking as sort of the sinister force, and like maybe people who work for him will be seen, and like what he's doing to the larger magical world across the globe will influence the story and affect the characters. And then maybe later in like a sequel or in a threequel, he'll make his like big debut, because if he is in the UK, right? But I think that being a sort of magical person, you could go to another country, so he could show up in New York or in LA or like in America and recruit and like and instill unrest.
Whatever his version of Death Eaters are, have them over here.
Yeah, I think that's totally possible. So that gets me really excited, because I don't know if you remember the chapters in the book when they described how Dumbledore beat Grindelwald, and it was like this massive battle, like too crazy and chaotic for words.
But so tragic too.
Yeah.
I think that to me is what's really interesting, is that like we know the tragic side of this story. So I view Grindelwald more as a sympathetic character than necessarily a villainous one, simply because we have this context of his relationship with Dumbledore.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested to see him as a villain, knowing there is maybe a not so evil side. But my next logical question after hearing Grindelwald is in it, we know that Dumbledore is Newt Scamander's professor before Newt left Hogwarts. Does this mean Dumbledore is in this movie?
J.K. Rowling said he was.
What?
Yes.
What?
Yes. She was.
Do you think that's too much? I'm nervous. Is like having Dumbledore in here too much?
Well, I feel like it sounds like a cameo to me. And she said he has a scene with Colin and Eddie, which is Colin Farrell's character. Percival Graves, and then Newt Scamander is Eddie Redmayne. So it sounds like he'll just have like a cool kind of one scene there, and I think that's cool.
Yeah.
I think it's not his story. I don't think he needs to be there to have a large role. Maybe later on he will, when Grindelwald comes into the picture, if he does, I'm assuming.
Yes.
But right now I think that's a nice thing to have there.
Okay, I am a big fan of Harry Potter. I have a Harry Potter tattoo. I
does.
really like Harry Potter, but I've been nervous about this movie, thinking, we were talking a little bit during your magical transit here about how this feels like it could be The Hobbit to the Lord of the Rings, Fantastic Beasts to Harry Potter sort of comparison. But this to me has me the most excited and interested in these new movies. What did you think about the footage? Like, what are your impressions from what you saw? Did this make you more excited than you were before?
Well, I think that's what Juan's been missing is sheaths. I know I just sort of have pulled his out of a cane, but it feels so good to like pull this out of this.
This is our producer Tom's wand. I don't want to break it. He'll shut down Keepin' It Real and probably murder me off camera. So,
I hope not. But so just real quick, the rest of what I saw was like Newt on a boat. He lands in New York. And he goes through customs, and there's the funny joke about he switches his suitcase, which has all his magical creatures, and they open it up, and it's just got clothes in it because of that magical little button. Then he goes, and then he I don't know where he's on the way to, probably I think a bank, because he stops out in front of a bank, and there's an anti-wizard rally in front of there by a woman named Mary Lou Barebone. Mm-hmm. And she's out there. Ezra Miller's character, who's her son, Credence.
Credence?
Credence.
Credence.
Credence Diggory.
Yeah, we knew that they're part of the New Salemers,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Which is this organization that's anti-wizard.
Yes, and then as they're there, one of the sisters, I believe it's Tina, is in the crowd eating a hot dog. Very New York thing to do. You know, she's like a wizard in disguise, a witch in disguise. And then Dan Fogler's character, who is there's a lot of new Harry Potter character names.
You're still
so I have to like use my cheat sheet here. The Jacob Kowalski. Who
is a nomad.
Yeah, who's a nomad. He sort of bumps into Newt and drops his case, and they do the switcheroo accidental. And then so he goes on into work into the bank with the thing of magical creatures, and then Newt's left with his. And then but while he's walking up the steps, a guy, like a businessman, tosses a coin to a bum on the street with like a hat full of money, full of change, and then it's a niffler, right? Sticks its little like claws and like nose out, and he hops out of the bag, and then he goes after the coin, and it's this funny little thing, and then so it was just kind of a cool, like, interesting. Eddie Redmayne doesn't really like grab you as Newt, although I'm not sure if he's supposed to. He's very kind of like timid and funny
Subdued character.
and a little awkward. So, but it seems like interesting, like ground they're setting for the movie. But also at the same time, I thought the inciting incident for the movie was gonna be Newt coming there and like have his case, and then it opens, and then a big monster gets out, and then it's running around destroying New York City, and they have to like catch it and everything else that got out.
Yeah, that's what I
Turns
assumed
out
too.
That's not quite what's happening, because if you remember from the trailer, there's this a shot of Colin Farrell up on this like ledge, and there's like a house that's been like destroyed, and there's like one wall standing. That had already happened before Newt got there, because then they cut to him standing in that rubble. And there's these guys, these muggles, some nomads, talking about what did it. So they're saying also we've seen it in the trailer, it's like this big dark matter thing with like red energy.
That's like going through the city.
Yeah, yeah. So they're saying, well, that's what did it. And then while, when
So maybe they need Newt to capture it.
Yeah, I think they'll like recruit him to help get that in. And while Colin's there, it like shakes the ground, and it's like still there, and then it like escapes and like dives under the subway tunnels. So it was very interesting.
So are you more excited now than you were before?
Yeah, and then after that, they showed sort of just a quick flashes of other scenes that happened later in the movie, and a lot of them were of Colin Farrell just doing magic, and some like really sick-looking magic, and he's like in a subway tunnel, and he's doing this like lightning that's like arcing off his wand, and I was like, what's going on here?
Is there a more Harry Potter name than Percival Graves?
Percival was also one of Dumbledore's names. It was like Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore.
Yes.
So
but
maybe there's a connection there.
Maybe.
And we've seen.
Maybe
Also they showed Ezra Miller holding the Deathly Hallows necklace.
Oh, really?
Oh my God! I know, right? And then we also seen Colin Farrell's poster, his character poster, also has the Deathly Hallows necklace.
Yes,
which
we
we
saw
also
that.
know is the symbol of Grindelwald and Dumbledore. It was like their secret thing together. So maybe it's a Grindelwald connection.
Maybe. Okay, so are you excited though? What is your reaction to
Here's
seeing
the thing.
this?
I think I'd like it almost no matter what, just because it's Harry Potter. I think just seeing these teases, I feel sufficiently teased. I'm more excited than I was going into it, because I didn't know what to think about the movie, didn't know what it was going to be about, didn't know anything about the tone. But I feel it's got kind of a funny, silly tone. It's got this dark sort of overlord wizard we do already know about sort of hanging over it. And there's all these cute little magical creatures. So I'm actually excited for it now. I do reserve full judgment to actually seeing it, but I'm in much better spirits than I was before I saw it.
Yeah, knowing that Grindelwald is involved definitely has me a bit more excited. We definitely want to know what you guys think based on what Joshua has described that he's seen. Are you more intrigued now that you know there's more than just magical creatures in this movie? So let us know. But Joshua, the other big news that we learned at this event from J.K. Rowling, who sadly was not at your screening.
She was in London.
Very tragic. We learned that this is no longer going to be a trilogy. It is going to be 5 Fantastic Beasts movies. So we haven't seen one, but there are 5, which either means that Warner Brothers is really confident with the first movie that J.K. Rowling delivered, or they just really need another franchise and they're relying on this one and they're going to make it be this by force of will. Again, we haven't seen the movie, so it's sort of hard to pass judgment one way or another, but my first instinct is negative against learning it's 5 movies. What do you think about this revelation? How did it go over during the announcement at the fan event?
People were crazy, because it was just a bunch of like Harry Potter
fans,
fans who just want more. But yeah, I do agree. You know, it's we haven't seen it yet, but and even though I've seen some footage and stuff and like the opening of the movie, I'm not like sold that idea particularly needs 5 movies. I think we're in the age of like stretching out an idea just so studios can get a couple extra movies, which equate to like some of these make like $1 billion a piece, so you can see why they want to do it. But it unfortunately feels like a cash grab, and you know, I don't want to say that, you know, obviously like to JK, like to Joe. Like, you know, this
You're
is
so
just
close.
It's like this new story you have is a cash grab, because like I don't know. I almost wonder if she originally intended it to be 5 movies, or was she sort of like, hey, do you think you could expand this here and give us another one? Like, I think it was originally 3. But then during the announcement, she was like, the trilogy idea was just a placeholder until we actually decided, and now it's going to be 5.
And she just started writing the second one as well, so it could have been
that
that
she already done.
Oh, well, I remember not too long ago was the announcement. It wouldn't surprise me if she burned through it that quickly, but maybe she realized then, oh, it is longer. But it is really easy to compare with, you know, Warner Brothers. They did this with the Hobbit films as well. The Hobbit was a short book. It was originally going to be 2 movies, then stretched out into 3. I don't know anyone who loves the Hobbit movies. It's certainly not me.
No,
I didn't even watch
not
watch all of them. So to see this happen now, again, I think you're right. We have had so many situations where storylines have been stretched past what they're due, and it backfires. Like, it feels a bit unwarranted. So this makes me a little bit nervous. Again, we were talking about with Avatar, like when it went from 1 sequel, and we haven't even seen that, and now there are 4 apparently in the works. But I am more excited about that news, knowing that Grindelwald is involved, knowing there could be a bigger overarching theme here that's being explored that ties everything together, instead of just, and then Newt got another magical creature back in his suitcase. Part 3.
Yeah. And I wonder if, you know, I'll stop being cynical for a second. I do think, you know, they said the next movie is not going to be in New York. It's going to be a new capital city. So we're going to get to explore more. I'm assuming it's in the United States, but it could be elsewhere.
Right.
That's very exciting. Really make it turn into a global franchise. Meet lots of different characters. And I also think because, you know, we do see Dumbledore briefly, or that's what J.K. Rowling said, that we're going to get a quick, you know, one scene with Dumbledore in this one. There's other older characters from the Harry Potter franchise who we could see younger version of, young McGonagall, off backpacking around the Americas, you know, or something like that, you know. So I do think it opens the door in an interesting way to do cool prequel things. But I do, again, worry about the Hobbit thing, where it was like, it kind of leaned into the prequel too much, where it was like, oh, you know, this character, they're going to be really crazy one day, but not yet, you know. And I was like, kind of put us in some uncomfortable situations.
Yeah, I'm with you on reserving full judgment until we've seen the first movie. I mean, I'm sure we're going to love it, but if we're overwhelmingly in love with it, I'm sure then we'll be demanding a full 8 Fantastic Beasts movies like we got Harry Potter ones. We want to know what you guys think about this news of 5 Fantastic Beasts movies. Is 5 fantastic, or maybe a little bit jumping the gun? So let us know in the comments. Right before we completely wrap it up, we're going to talk about box office, because that's how we end things here on Keepin' It Real. After such an exciting episode with big news, not that exciting movies coming out this weekend. That's my bias showing. We have The Accountant opening. That's probably the biggest movie opening up this week, with Ben Affleck, which Jim reviewed. He gave it a 7.3, which is good.
It's good.
It's good. It's got the Batfleck in it. There's also Kevin Hart, What Now, which is Kevin Hart's comedy, like concert film. Max Steel, which was not screened to press beforehand, which is always a good sign. I personally do not have high expectations for that, but who knows? Maybe it's going to blow us all away. And then in limited release, Shin Godzilla opened on Wednesday. We gave it an 8.5. People really, really are enjoying this film. A fun political commentary, a little bit of a satire from Japan, take on Godzilla. Also, we have an early review of Inferno, which is the new Robert Langdon movie, which we did not care for. Our UK team gave it a 4.0. Maybe saying that Tom Hanks should let this character in this franchise go. Sorry, Dan Brown. But yeah, actually didn't see any big box office numbers. I have a feeling Girl on the Train is going to remain at number 1, or it could be The Accountant, but probably not a huge box office weekend, as we're leaning, or we're gearing up for the big sort of blockbuster movie finale to the year with Doctor Strange, Fantastic Beasts, Rogue One, and many other exciting movies. So in that overwhelmingly enthusiastic note, let's wrap up this episode of Keeping It Real. Hopefully we'll give you back Jim Vejvoda next week, but you better be good. You better deserve it, or else he's going to stay sick or in Italy forever. So for all things movies, make sure to keep it here at IGN.